So, Dr. Jorgensen, the 5-year anniversary of Fukushima is coming up. Could you maybe explain for us what do we know today about the actual health impacts on the area, particularly cancer health impacts, and does the public have a good understanding of that?
Okay, so we know that the exposures to the people at Fukushima were relatively modest, so that we would not expect significant levels of cancer or any other type of health effects from the radiation doses that these people see. In the future, we may there's surveillance going on to make sure that we don't find any. But as it stands now, at these dose levels, we wouldn't expect to see any significant health effects.
And how does that compare with what happened in Chernobyl in the late 80s?
Chernobyl was a much worse situation. Chernobyl released more radiation, more people were exposed. They were not evacuated from the area. They ate contaminated food. They had thyroid disease, which involved, because they were not given enough thyroid iodine, and so they were much more susceptible to the radioactivity that was released, and they suffered increased rates of thyroid cancer and increased rates of other cancers.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the public fears about the reaction or the impact of Fukushima, and tell us a little bit about what about those tuna that migrated across the Pacific, showed up in California. Are those a risk to American consumers?
People are very much afraid of radiation. And I think it's largely because they can't see it, and they associate radiation with atomic bombs and also cancer, which are scary things. However, the risk is related to the dose, and the doses under these circumstances at Fukushima, again, were very low, and the fish that got to the coast of the United States had very low levels of radioactivity, lower than their natural levels of radioactivity. So this does not pose any health threat to the American public.
Were people worried about it? Did people stay away from tuna for a while?
People were very worried about it. People bought iodine tablets to block their thyroids and things like that, all of which are not effective against the type of radiation that the tuna had anyway. But again, I think it's just on this fear level because they don't fully understand radiation, and they associate this invisible threat as being deadly.
Okay, and you start your book with the proverb, "In the dark, all cats are jaguars." Tell me about that. What does that mean?
Well, what's meant by that anonymous proverb is that if you can't see something, you assume the worst. And so all types of radiation are not the same. Some are dangerous and some are benign, but we can't see any of them. And so it's really hard for us to distinguish between things that we cannot see. And what I try to do in the book is help people understand that a microwave oven is not the same as a CT scan, is not the same as a nuclear weapon. So if people see these things in different light, they'll be less afraid.
Tell me a little bit about the public's perception and fear of electricity 100 plus years ago or 150 years ago, and the fear and perception of radiation today.
Is very similar. So we've gone through this before. And when electricity was first introduced, again, it killed people by electrocution, which was very mysterious to people. They couldn't see electricity. They were very fearful of it. At that time, electrical wires were being strung all over the place with very little protection, so sometimes wires would come down and randomly electrocute people. That happened occasionally in New York City, and people were in a panic about electricity. With time, people began to appreciate that the risk of electricity could be controlled and it could be made safe. And even people who didn't know the difference between an amp and a volt knew that a down power line was not the same as having a battery, a flashlight battery in your pocket. So, but we haven't reached the same point with radiation, and I'm hoping that we'll push that consciousness along so people will understand about radiation the same way as they do about electricity. Nobody is pro or anti-electricity anymore. We've got a grip on the risks associated with that.
Okay, and keeping the electricity theme alive, we'll go to a lightning round. The hot button issues dealing with radiation that a lot of the public thinks about. Just give me a really quick summary of what's the science say. Is this a risk or not? Radon.
Radon is primarily a risk for smokers, and so radon increases the risk of cancer, of lung cancer, for people who are already smokers. People who are not smokers are at much lower risk.
diagnostic x-rays?
Diagnostic x-rays are almost always warranted when you're looking for suspected disease. So a patient comes in, they have a suspected disease and you're trying to find it. Almost always it's worth doing the x-rays. What's not clear is x-rays that are used to find disease that you don't suspect is there. In other words, screening. And so whole body screens with CTs to look for disease that the patient has no symptoms of, that's a much more questionable activity.
Cell phones.
Cell phones. A lot has been made of the fact that the World Health Organization said that cell phones are a possible carcinogen. Okay, so virtually everything that the World Health Organization has looked at has gotten some designation like that because it's difficult to eliminate something as not possibly being carcinogenic. But the evidence for this is extremely weak. We have no strong evidence that cell phones cause cancer, and particularly brain cancer, because brain cancer levels have not gone up in 30 or 40 years, and if they're associated with cell phones, we'd expect to see huge increases in brain cancer. They're just not there.